Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining today's session. Today you have the pleasure of hearing from myself, Chris Whitehead, and Chris Sophocles, who you should be able to see on the screen now. Just give us a quick wave, great, thank you. In terms of our roles at Adobe, we're both solution consultants. I predominantly focus a bit more on the AEM cloud architecture and deployments. You'll be hearing about a bit more from me right at the end of the session. But you'll mainly be hearing from Chris Sophocles today, who's an AEM product expert. The topic that we're covering today is how to unlock Gen AI in Adobe Experience Manager and get the best out of really streamlining your content and asset creation workflow, using the products in the Adobe ecosystem, such as Adobe Express and Firefly, which seamlessly integrate into Adobe Experience Manager. If you have any challenges today with your content and asset creation, your workflow, please feel free to share that in the chat, and we can maybe incorporate that in some of our talk track today. If you have any specific questions during the session, please use the Q&A box, and we will try and help answer your questions during the session there. So without further ado, I will hand over to Chris, who will take you through today's session.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, hello everyone. Great to meet you if I've not met you before. Like Chris mentioned, my name is Chris Sophocles, and yes, I'm a solutions consultant here at Adobe, and I have the pleasure of talking to a lot of our customers about the content supply chain. So like Chris mentioned, we're going to jump into in a little bit into a few demos of some of really like the key integration points between AEM assets and some of our creative tools to really get the most out of generative AI and Adobe Firefly as part of that integrated AEM workflow. But before I do so, I thought I would just talk a little bit about the content supply chain at Adobe. So this may be a concept that you're more than familiar with within your own businesses, or maybe you've heard us at Adobe or even myself as an individual talk about this publicly before. But I thought I'd start with this just to really set the scene. So as we are all more than aware, the content landscape is changing. There's a huge demand for personalized experiences. There's a huge demand for streamlining content production workflows. And of course, now with the introduction of Gen AI, there's kind of an even more amplified expectation of huge amounts of content volume, but also content velocity as well. And also a lot of that pertains not just to our written content, but also our creative assets as well, which can often put a strain on whether it's our agencies or our internal creative teams as well. And we see here in this example that actually even for a relatively small catalog of whether it be products, destinations, SKUs, services, we can very, very quickly extrapolate up into potentially millions of variations of assets. And actually, speaking to a lot of the customers that I've worked with personally, this is very much the case for those organizations. And this is organizations of a wide variety of sizes, not just reserved for those kind of larger organizations as well. So perhaps this is a bit of pain that you're feeling within your organizations as well. But definitely, I think across the industry, we're seeing that content demand really, really explode. And of course, the way that we're set up to deliver on these kind of demands, generally speaking, tends to be relatively siloed. We have different teams that work on different types of content, maybe for different channels. And a lot of the time, they might be using different technologies, whether that's different asset repositories, different ways of working. And it doesn't really allow us to scale beyond human scale when it comes to being able to effectively produce and reuse a lot of these assets. So, of course, as I'm sure you may be well aware as, users or people interested in DAM and AEM assets, this is something that, of course, we look to address, but of course now starting to really augment this by bringing some of those generative AI workflows much closer to Adobe Experience Manager as well. So we sort of touched on it in the last slide, but of course, in most organizations, the asset production and content production workflow can feel a little bit disjointed. So lots of different teams communicating in lots of different ways, and using lots of different tools. And therefore, it does stop us from being able to, leverage AI, be able to consistently work beyond human scale in a fully kind of integrated ecosystem. And this is something that, of course, we at Adobe are really, working hard to try and solve for our customers. So when we talk about the content supply chain in general at Adobe, we talk about everything from workflow and planning, so briefing in campaigns, doing that ideation of campaigns, through to the production workflows, whether that is creating creative assets, which is kind of what we'll look at today, but also the creation of that content itself, whether that's being delivered to the web or out to other headless channels. And then finally, that delivery and activation. So actually getting that in front of the eyes of our customers, getting it out into our outbound channels, and actually starting to measure the success of that. Now, of course, one of the things that really sits at the core of these three pillars is, of course, asset management and AEM assets. And that's what we're going to focus on today, and look also at those AI capabilities that we sort of are bringing into that tool as well. Perfect. So as we go through these couple of demos, and we're going to keep it quite high level and quite short because it's only a short session today. But if you've got any comments or anything that's particularly interesting, or it's something that you're exploring within your businesses today, I'd love to hear about that in the chat. And as Chris mentioned, if you have any questions as I go through the demo, please do feel free to drop those into the Q&A pod. I will be monitoring the Q&A pod as I go through the next kind of like 15, 20 minutes or so. So the Q&A pod is going to be the best place to drop those questions, and I can do my best to kind of answer those on the fly if I can. If not, we'll have plenty of time at the end to do some Q&A and wrap up. Brilliant. Okay, so with that, we will jump into our first use case, which we will explore. And the first use case is actually around something that we've had in AEM for a relatively long time. Perhaps it's something that a lot of people are already leveraging, and that is using Asset Link to connect AEM assets directly into the Creative Cloud. And of course, now with all of our amazing innovations in the Creative Cloud around Adobe Firefly and generative AI, that's really going to help us to bring those Gen AI use cases much closer to our AEM users. So let's jump in and take a look at that to begin with. Okay, so I'm going to start off here in Photoshop. And a lot of you guys, like I mentioned, may already be familiar with Asset Link. So this is my link from the Creative Cloud directly into Adobe Experience Manager assets to help me access those assets from the DAM, check those out, and make changes to those. And I've also got the Workfront panel here as well. So thinking about that full content supply chain use case, as a creative professional, I will be able to receive any briefs or any tasks that I have for me to do. You can see here that one of my tasks for today is actually to send a Mother's Day card to my mum. That's coming up this weekend. Must remember to do that. And I can take that task, understand what I need to do, and actually start delivering on that work. And that very well may include some assets from the DAM. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of our assets, and I'm going to take this one here, and I'm going to check it out. There we go. So if you're not familiar with the kind of Asset Link setup, or it's not something you've leveraged before, this setup is going to allow me to do various different things. One of those is to actually check out and check in assets. This means that I'm actually going to pull that asset down from the DAM to make some edits. But while I'm doing so, it's going to be locked within AEM assets so that others can't make changes to it while I'm doing my work. So in this case, let's imagine that my workfront brief has told me that we have this asset for let's say, the website, but we want to reuse it on Instagram or as a thumbnail. Now, one thing that I'm sure you may all be very familiar with is with AEM assets natively, we can very easily use Smart Crop to turn this asset into a square rendition. This is something we can do automatically right from within AEM. But let's say in this case that we don't want to crop the asset, but in fact we want to expand the asset out. Perhaps the asset includes some text or some elements which would simply be lost if we were to crop that asset down into a square. In which case we're going to do the inverse, and instead of cropping to a square format, we're going to use generative fill to actually outpaint across the image using generative AI to fill out that asset. So kind of doing the opposite of what our amazing Smart Crop technology does. So in this case, you can see I have generated that asset ready for me to go. I can see a few different variations here. Choose the one that I like. Let's go with this one. And I just think it's really cool to kind of like get rid of this layer for a second to kind of see that, you know, this is all stuff that just simply didn't exist in that asset before. It's very, very cool. And I'd recommend, you know, if you have Photoshop, have a play around with this yourself. It's very good fun. So just as I am able to do before within Asset Link, all I need to do is save this asset. There we go. And I can very easily just check this back into the DAM. There we go. And I can check that asset. So we can see that asset coming back to us in AEM. And as is always the case, all of that processing that's going to take place as we normally do when we upload assets is going to be starting to happen with this asset that we have here. Quite a funny example, of course, is that one of the processing steps that's going to take place with this asset is Smart Crop. So where we've used AI to extend that asset back out into a square, of course, we can use Smart Crop to use AI to bring that back down into a landscape aspect ratio, which I think is a quite a funny symptom of you know, really starting to boost these workflows. But all round, very, very cool. Perfect. So let me swipe back over here. So these are the kind of workflows, like I mentioned, that we are perhaps already familiar with, you know, pulling assets from the DAM into the Creative Cloud tools, making those edits, whether they're with generative AI or just using the skills of our amazing creative professionals, and sending those back to AEM or perhaps through Workfront for review and approval. What we'll have a look now is how we can really empower complete non-creatives, people who either don't know how to use or don't have access to the pro tools, the Creative Cloud tools, to actually come and self-serve a lot of those creative assets. So this is really for those marketing professionals who would usually go to a creative team or usually send out to an agency to make amends. How can they self-serve that creative work for themselves? And this is where we're going to have a look at Adobe Express integrating with Adobe Experience Manager. So let me have a look at that now. I might hand back to Chris. So Chris, as he sort of mentioned at the start, he's actually going to talk us through how, for all of our customers who might have a variety of different AEM setups right now, how you can start to take advantage of some of these capabilities within AEM assets as a cloud service. So Chris, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully. So yeah, just to quickly take you through some of the points that Chris has shared today in terms of the connectivity and how things work. Often the question is, because we have a couple of different flavors of deployment, and this is where I kind of come in with the architecture and deployment models. So there's a couple of different ways of deploying AEM sites today and assets. So we've got AEM Cloud Service on the left, and you can see we've got a separate sites program. So it's a kind of separated AEM instance, and then next to that we have AEM Assets Cloud Service. And then those two are connected because they're two separate programs. So they're two separate instances of AEM. They're connected with something called connected assets. They kind of seamlessly integrate and can talk to each other. And then you can see we've got Adobe Express and Adobe Firefly. So as long as you're licensed for Adobe Express and you have AEM assets and sites there, all of these things connect. There isn't like a big implementation cost. Adobe Express, what Chris has shown you there is very much out of the box. So if you have a license and you can access Express, Firefly, and you've got assets there, you can start setting this up today and utilizing that. If we move on to the next column, which is called Cloud Service, but you can see it's just a slightly different version of it. This is where we've got AEM Sites Cloud Service, and then we've got AEM Assets Cloud Service, and it's kind of grouped into the same program. So this is the experience of you going into AEM and you can see your sites and assets all within the same instance. That's another way of deploying it. And in that case, very similar, Adobe Express, Adobe and Firefly and all the things that Chris has shown, they seamlessly then, Adobe Express integrates into the single program there. Moving on to something else that you'll probably have heard about, it's the latest kind of features that we're bringing out now. It's something called Edge Delivery Service. So with Edge Delivery Service giving you that accelerated delivery and development pipeline there to help with that. So again, very similar. So you'll see like a common theme here. You can always see Adobe Express and Firefly really being integrated straight into AEM Assets. So AEM Assets Cloud Service is really the key connecting block here. And then it's AEM Cloud Service Assets going into Cloud Service Sites or directly via our Asset Selector straight into Edge Delivery Services. So that's how that would work. And finally, for AEM Managed Service customers, we have lots of customers down AEM Managed Services, especially with custom requirements and ways of working there, and how that would work. Again, Adobe Express with Firefly connecting to AEM Cloud Service assets, and then it connects back to Managed Service. So if you are one of those Managed Service customers that has a highly regulated custom architecture that we have to deploy, it doesn't mean that you're not able to start using these things. However, we would deploy assets on Cloud Service, and we're able to take Cloud Service assets and connect that back to Managed Services. So you still get access to all of the features and ability to use everything that Chris has shown you today.
Track now. So what I'll do is I'll have a quick look and see if there's any questions that we can answer, and then I can jump back into just show what the last part of that demo looks like. So Chris, I think you touched on one of these questions there. They asked, it's a question from CML who says, is the integration of AEM assets into Express out of the box? And yes, absolutely it is. So like Chris mentioned with Cloud Service, if you have, as a user, if you have access to Cloud Service and you have access to Adobe Express from a licensing point of view, absolutely, it should just work for you. We talked about, interesting. We talked about whether we could apply a watermark or something similar to indicate that an image was generated by generative AI. A really interesting topic, actually, and it falls into the content authenticity initiative that we have at Adobe that we work with. So when you generate assets with Adobe Firefly, they are tagged essentially within the metadata that they've been generated by an AI model, and that then lives with that asset. I'm not by any means an expert in the content authenticity initiative. We have whole teams at Adobe that focus absolutely on that, but it's a really great question, and yes, something that we at Adobe take very, very seriously. Perfect. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we can just have a look at this bit that I teased you with earlier that we couldn't see before. I'm just going to share my screen once again. Here we go. So hopefully you can see my screen. So I've just switched to someone else's AEM instance, only because mine, for whatever reason, wasn't playing ball with me. But you can see that this workflow is ever so slightly different in that we are starting within AEM assets, selecting an asset and editing it in Adobe Express. So this is what we call the embedded editor. It's Adobe Express embedded right here within AEM assets. And you can see that very quickly and easily. I can come in, I can bring that asset in this case. And as we sort of could do before, I can use my generative AI, Firefly, to add things in there. And I can also have access to all of my brand templates and logos as well. So relatively quickly, I can come in here, drop a logo in. There we go. And in a similar way as I could do before with templates, but sort of working with that similar use case, but a little bit backwards, I can come in here, create something on brand. And here, as well as being able to kind of save that back down into the DAM, because we're already in the DAM, my options are slightly varied as well and a bit more specific to where I am in context. So actually here, as well as being able to save that down as a new asset, I can actually save this as a variation of the existing asset as well, as a new version. So because I'm in the DAM, there's some things that I can do here which really help me to truly edit this asset within context and add that as a new version of that asset rather than just saving it down as a new asset overall. So just to show you that slightly more streamlined workflow as well. And I think both of these workflows, whether you come in from AEM to make quick changes to an image, or whether you're in Express wanting to pull your assets in, they both, I think, are really, really valuable at various points in the content supply chain. So there you go. Really wanted to show you that because I think it's super quick and easy to come and create new variations of those assets. And it's really quite cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe back to the slides and we'll have a little look within the Q&A. Let me come back to this screen. So I can see some more questions here. So one from Rihanna, who asks, we have similar use cases and need to do editing in bulk. Is it possible to edit in bulk on Adobe Express? So Adobe Express enables for some level of kind of bulk editing. So we can generate lots of different sizes of assets all in one go and a few other things like that. But for really, I guess, large scale asset production and asset variations, there's actually some really cool stuff we can do in conjunction with AEM assets, with Workfront and Workfront Fusion, with the Creative Cloud APIs. And this is where the kind of full content supply chain vision really starts to come to life with everything working together. Because essentially what we can do there is create one piece of kind of master artwork, feed that into Workfront and Workfront Fusion with the Creative Cloud APIs, and create hundreds or thousands of variations of that as well. So depending on kind of what scale you're looking to operate at, there's options within Express, but also options within the whole ecosystem to really scale to those hundreds or thousands of variations. There we go. So a couple of other questions here. So one person said, with AI generated imagery, how can we assure that the image is not used by a competitor? So it's a good question. So one thing, when you create assets using Adobe Firefly, if we were to both put in the same prompt, so say you were to go ahead and search for, like I did there, beautiful mountain range on a sunny day, we would actually not receive the same results. So each person would receive different results when they go in, and even if they use the same prompts, they would not get the same results. Kind of exactly for that reason, right? Because a lot of the time, until we get as a community, more advanced in our prompting, it is likely that people will use fairly similar prompts when interacting with AI. So that's something that we have built into the tool already. And I can see a question here around someone asking, they say they already have a Creative Cloud license, but they can't see Express. And how can they go about that? So I'm not necessarily a Creative Cloud specialist, but Express is usually licensed separately or as kind of an add-on to your Creative Cloud contract. So I won't say much more than that, only because it's not my area of expertise. But if you were to reach out to your Adobe representative on the kind of the Creative Cloud side of things, they would be able to point you in the right direction to how you can start to get access to Adobe Express and start to have a play around with these things. And I can actually see, Chris, this might be an interesting question for you here, which is perhaps what would be some of the reasons or the pros and cons of having AEM assets and sites as separate instances versus perhaps on the same program? Because I know you sort of touched on it when you were talking about some of the options.
Yeah, so in terms of the I guess the licensing part of it and how it works from there, it's actually the same. So when you actually purchase assets, if you have AEM sites on cloud service, and then you purchase assets as part of that, you actually get asked at the deployment stage, not at the contract and commercial part of it. At the deployment stage, you actually get asked, how do you want to deploy this? Do you want to deploy it as a separate standalone solution, or do you want to have this combined with sites? I would say the pros and cons against both approaches. One would be, typically we see assets deployed with sites when the asset solution is really predominantly its use case is just for that site solution, and therefore it kind of fits more of that scenario, right? You log into one AEM instance, and really, I've got my site solution, I've got my assets that are there, and they're all combined in the same program. And all of the users, the same kind of users that go into sites, they're going into assets, and it's all one interface there. However, we have other use cases where someone wants, okay, they've got AEM sites, but also they want a complete corporate separate DAM. So this DAM is being integrated into AEM sites, but it's also being integrated into 30 other systems, and it's got a completely separate workflow, and everyone who goes into AEM assets got nothing to do necessarily with the website. It's more of a very separated use case. So there isn't really there's not something you're losing by combining the two together, but put it that way. It's more of a preference about how you want to operate, and do you have that really separate use case of a standalone DAM that's going to be maybe utilized for many different systems and solutions there, or is it predominantly actually my asset solution is mainly for my site solution, and therefore it may make more sense to deploy it into the same program.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Chris.
Okay, well, so thank you everyone for attending the session.